Kellor was a quiet man. He had spent most of his life running a small tavern at the edge of a deserted spaceport on the planet Vero 5. Once, this place had been a bustling hub, a last stop for travelers heading into the unknown regions. But those days were long gone. The spaceport was now just a shadow of its former self, a place where only the most desperate or the most dangerous dared to visit. One evening, as the twin moons of Vero 5 rose over the dusty horizon, a group of rough-looking mercenaries walked into Kellor's tavern. They were heavily armed, their armor battered from many battles. Kellor's instinct told him they were trouble, but he knew better than to show fear. He simply nodded and served them their drinks. The leader of the group, a tall woman with a scar running down her face, glanced around the tavern with sharp eyes. "Not many people out here," she remarked, her voice cold and hard. "Not much reason to be," Kellor replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Most folks avoid this place now." The woman smirked. "That's what makes it perfect for our kind." Kellor's heart sank. He knew what she meant. The spaceport was lawless, a haven for those who didn't want to be found. And now, it seemed, they had found him. As the night wore on, Kellor kept a close eye on the mercenaries. They drank heavily and laughed loudly, but there was an underlying tension in the air. Kellor could sense that they were waiting for something or someone. Just before midnight, the tavern door creaked open, and a new figure stepped inside. He was tall, clad in a dark cloak that obscured most of his features. The room fell silent as he walked to the bar, his footsteps echoing on the worn floor. Kellor noticed the man's eyes first. They were sharp, calculating, and seemed to take in everything at once. The mercenaries stiffened as he approached, their hands moving subtly toward their weapons. "What can I get you?" Kellor asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Water," the man replied, his voice low and even. Kellor raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. He handed the man a glass of water, noticing that his hands were steady despite the tension in the room. The man drank slowly, his gaze never leaving the mercenaries. After a long moment, he set the glass down and spoke again. "I hear you're looking for someone." The leader of the mercenaries narrowed her eyes. "And who might you be?" The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Just someone who's very good at finding people." The leader of the mercenaries, a tall woman with a scar on her face, stood up slowly. Her hand rested on the hilt of her blaster. "We don't need your help, stranger," she said, her voice cold and full of suspicion. The man in the dark cloak remained calm. "Are you sure about that?" He replied evenly. "I've already found you, haven't I?" The room grew tense. The mercenaries shifted in their seats, their eyes narrowing as they sized up the stranger. Kellor, the tavern owner, could feel the danger in the air. His heart raced, and he took a small step back, careful not to draw attention to himself. Under the bar, his hand hovered near the emergency alarm, just in case things went wrong. The woman didn't lower her guard. Instead, she slowly drew her blaster, the metal gleaming in the dim light. "Who sent you?" she demanded. "No one," the man said, his voice still calm. "I'm here for my own reasons." The tension in the room tightened like a coiled spring. Kellor could see the mercenaries' hands inching closer to their weapons. He knew what was coming. The stranger's calmness only made the mercenaries more nervous, more dangerous. The leader of the mercenaries sneered. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But this is none of your business. Walk away now, while you still can." The man didn't move. His eyes, sharp and steady, locked onto hers. "It is my business now." In a flash, before anyone could react, the man reached under his cloak and drew a weapon. It was sleek and silver, unlike any blaster Kellor had ever seen. He moved so quickly that the mercenaries barely had time to process what was happening. The man fired 3 precise shots in quick succession. The leader's blaster was knocked from her hand, and the 2 mercenaries closest to her were disarmed just as quickly. Their weapons clattered to the floor. The remaining mercenaries scrambled, trying to grab their weapons, but the man was too fast. He moved with a speed and precision that was almost unnatural. In a matter of seconds, he had all of them at gunpoint, their own weapons lying useless on the floor. Kellor watched in stunned silence. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to make sense of what he had just witnessed. The man in the cloak hadn't even broken a sweat. He stood there, calm and in control, while the mercenaries looked at each other in shock. The leader of the mercenaries glared at the man, clutching her injured hand. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking slightly with a mix of anger and fear. The man didn't answer right away. He lowered his weapon slightly, his gaze shifting around the room as if assessing the situation. Finally, he turned his attention back to the leader. "I'm the one who's going to end this," he said, his tone cold and final. Kellor felt a chill run down his spine. The man's words carried a weight that made it clear he wasn't bluffing. There was a darkness in his voice, something that hinted at a past filled with violence and loss. The leader of the mercenaries tried to keep her composure, but Kellor could see the fear in her eyes. "You think you can stop us? We've taken down bigger threats than you." The man smiled, a cold, humorless smile. "I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to eliminate you." Without hesitation, the man pulled the trigger again. The leader of the mercenaries collapsed to the floor, her eyes wide with shock. The other mercenaries froze, too terrified to move. They knew they were no match for him. Kellor could only watch as the man, calm and methodical, turned his attention to the remaining mercenaries. He kept his weapon trained on them, his eyes never wavering. The tension in the room was suffocating, and Kellor knew that the man wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger again if any of them made a move. But none of them did. They were defeated, their leader dead, and their spirits broken. The man in the dark cloak had won, and he had done it with a level of skill and precision that Kellor had never seen before. As the man lowered his weapon, the room fell into a heavy silence. The mercenaries were subdued, too afraid to fight back. And Kellor, standing behind the bar, couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and fear at the stranger who had just saved his life. Kellor watched in stunned silence as the man methodically disarmed the mercenaries. His movements were smooth and practiced, like someone who had been in countless battles before. The leader of the mercenaries glared at the man, clutching her injured hand. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he lowered his weapon slightly and looked around the room, his eyes settling on Kellor for a brief moment. Then he turned back to the leader. "I'm the one who's going to end this," he said, his voice cold and final. Kellor felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about the way the man spoke, something that hinted at a dark past and an even darker purpose. The leader of the mercenaries gritted her teeth. "You think you can stop us? We've taken down bigger threats than you." The man smiled again, that same cold, humorless smile. "I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to eliminate you." Without another word, he pulled the trigger. The leader of the mercenaries crumpled to the floor, her eyes wide with shock. The remaining mercenaries froze, too terrified to move. The tavern was eerily quiet in the aftermath of the confrontation. The man holstered his weapon and turned to Kellor, who was still trying to process what had just happened. "You're safe now," the man said, his tone softer than before. "They won't bother you again." Kellor nodded numbly, his mind racing. Who are you?" The man hesitated for a moment, then reached into his cloak and pulled out a small metal insignia. He placed it on the bar in front of Kellor. "I'm a ghost," he said quietly, "a relic of a war that most have forgotten." Kellor picked up the insignia, recognizing the symbol of an ancient order that had long been disbanded. He looked up, but the man was already heading for the door. "Thank you," Kellor called out, his voice shaky. The man paused at the threshold, then turned his head slightly. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just keep the memory alive." With that, he disappeared into the night, leaving Kellor alone in the quiet tavern. The insignia lay heavy in his hand, a reminder of the stranger who had saved his life. And as the twin moons of Vero 5 shone down on the deserted spaceport, Kellor couldn't help but wonder how many more ghosts were out there, wandering the galaxy in search of a purpose.